you. I think there is no question.
Yeah. So going forward with love in our hearts, our next presentation will move on to Marianne Littlejohn. Marianne is a professional independent midwife, and she's been practicing for the last 38 years in South Africa. She attends home births and has just commissioned and opened the Natural Centre in Raisthorpe in South Africa. She has attended over 2,000 births over the years, and she has an honours degree in psychology, a diploma in nursing and midwifery, and a certificate in occupational health. Thank you so much for joining us today, Marianne. We look forward to hearing your experiences in South Africa. Oh, you're muted again, aren't you? I'm sure Saeed's going to unmute you now. We can't hear you yet, Marianne.
Mute.
Oh, that's good. That
okay.
Worked.
Is that better?
Yes.
Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes?
Yes. Do you have slides to share?
Super. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me loudly enough?
Perfect.
Great. I'm just going to lean forward so I catch the mic here. My Mac is a little bit old. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Julie, for that very inspiring talk. First and foremost, I'm going to come at this with a slightly different tack. I am a person with my own trauma. And it is as a result of my own trauma that I have become a midwife and am passionate about looking after women and being a facilitator for births and helping to mother mothers, helping them to mother their children. I trained in 1981 at the then largest hospital in the Southern Hemisphere, Tygerberg Hospital. And I don't know if you can imagine, I grew up on a farm and went into this huge edifice straight from the farm. And it was absolutely overwhelming. And I went from watching farm animals mate in the field and give birth in the pen and drop their foals in the stable. And I was sent from that to watching what perhaps was a woman under a whole lot of green, sterile cloths with just her vagina showing. And it was really, really a shock. I then became pregnant and gave birth at home 9 months later to my own son, my firstborn, and inspired by my best friend, Patricia Turngren, who was a childbirth educator, and of course, Ina May Gaskin, I set up my own home birth practice and I started to learn from the women themselves out of the hospital setting. So this journey intertwined itself with my life over the last 40 years. And I can't say that I have a life separate from my midwifery. And I've been through several crises, and recently, going through menopause, I sat down and thought very hard, how can I define myself other than being a midwife? And I think that was a very important journey, spiritual journey for me. And I want to share a little bit about what happened during my second pregnancy. I had a breakdown, an emotional and mental breakdown. And the memories of my own birth, my own childhood, and what my own mother had done to me came flooding back. I went on to give birth to my baby unassisted at home. And it just brought home to me how important this work was that I was doing, and how if we could heal ourselves as midwives first, that as midwives we come to our work with trauma, and if we haven't worked through our trauma, we resonate with trauma. So we seek out situations where we will be traumatized, and the hospital for me was clearly very traumatizing. And if we work through our trauma, we can then hold the space for women in our care. And believe me, at least 60%, if not more, of women come to birth with sexual trauma, violent trauma, abusive trauma, trauma done to them by their mothers, their fathers, and their births. And so this has informed my journey, and I identify both with the mothers and with the babies. And yeah, I spent the last 30 years reprocessing and healing myself, as well as facilitating the healing of mothers and babies to heal themselves. I subsequently studied an honors degree in psychology and parenting, and I'm busy with a diploma in infant mental health at the moment. I did want to mention, somebody mentioned about people who go into hospital and they should, I think it was Gail Johnson, about people who should prevent the cesarean. What's interesting to me in my practice is that I have a lot of women come to me for VBACs, and I started attending VBACs, vaginal birth after cesarean, in probably about 2010. So I've been attending them more often ever since then. And the women come because they're going through a spiritual journey, and that journey has to do with the trauma that they experienced during the childbirth and obviously prior, but it's focused around the experience of their birth and of having their autonomy robbed from them in the first birth, and sometimes 2 or 3 births. So I've attended or facilitated the birth of natural childbirths of women who have had 1 cesarean, who have had 2 cesareans, who have had 3 cesareans, and was probably the first person in South Africa to attend a natural childbirth after 3 cesareans. And I know someone who's given birth after 5 cesareans. She gave birth unassisted. And I am currently assisting someone who wishes to give birth after 6 cesareans. So, yeah, that's on the edge. But the point I want to make is that these women are finding themselves. So I want to say that we're all on a journey, and that it's not right or wrong, and that everyone, the obstetricians, why are some obstetricians so keen on cutting women? How were they born? Very often you'll find that they had traumatic births, traumatic vacuum deliveries, or traumatic forceps deliveries, or high forceps, because I'm talking about the older guys who I grew up with, because that was popular at the time. And so they unconsciously are vowing never to do that to another person. So we don't know the story behind someone who wants to do many, many cesareans, you know, and there's a story behind it. And so I've become quite aware of these stories. And even when I facilitate natural childbirth, also try and be very aware of the story behind the story. I work with women and I facilitate water births, gentle births, active births, family births, delayed cord clamping, undisturbed birth, and undisturbed first hour of the birth. And I was just so excited to listen to the lady from Lebanon who gave that wonderful presentation on delayed cord clamping. Now, you know, I've been aware of this research and the method of delayed cord clamping for many years and wanting to share it with people. But now I find myself, I'm tired and I don't have the energy of a young person, and I'm not a very good campaigner, but I'm very good at being at a birth, and I'm very good at waiting. So we birth the baby, the mother births the baby, and then we wait. And when she pushes out the placenta, we put it in a little bag and we put it next to the mother's body. We tie it up so it's secure, and baby sits with a cord attached to the placenta until the mother and the father are ready to sever the cord. And they're unaware. They don't know that it's done differently in a hospital. This is, for them, it's just normal. So that's very exciting for me. I mostly work one-on-one with clients. I obviously do childbirth education classes, but the best part for me is working one-on-one. And I bring the women into the clinic and everything is about health, where they come from. One of the questions I ask them is, how did your mother give birth? And I asked someone that question yesterday, and she said to me, my mother's not alive anymore, I don't know. And if I hadn't asked that question, I wouldn't have learned that her mother has died and that she's motherless and she's going to have her first baby. And yeah, so that was an eye-opener for me, and also an eye-opener for her, because it got her thinking about, how was she born? Perhaps there's an aunt she can ask, or someone in the family who might know. The health of the mother, I'm really fanatic about the health, the diet and the lifestyle. And women from all socioeconomic groups come to me. So some women eat a very, very basic diet, and other women eat junk food, and other women eat well. And I try and tailor my advice so that this woman will eat better. We have a very high rate of diabetes in pregnancy in South Africa, and pre-diabetes, and we have probably the largest babies in the world because we grow genetically modified food, maize, soya, wheat. It's all genetically modified, and the staple diet of people in Africa is maize or sorghum, but in South Africa it's mostly maize. So the first leg of opening the childbirth center is the health of the mother, and the second one is that we wanted to create a safe, clean but simple environment for women in this area of South Africa. Obviously we have all the sterile plastics that we need to have, and we have collaborated with a local obstetrician who is our backup should we need to transfer. There was a story though that I wanted to share about sterility. And first of all, I'm a Semmelweis fan. I don't know if you know about Ignaz Semmelweis. I have to tell the story every time. Ignaz Semmelweis realized that the midwives who washed their hands were safer for the women than the doctors who didn't wash their hands. And the women didn't die when they were being cared for by the midwives who washed their hands. But when the doctors worked with the women, they died of puerperal sepsis. And poor old Ignaz Semmelweis was incarcerated for his wisdom and possibly murdered for speaking out about what he'd noticed in order to try and save women. But another cultural habit that women had in those times, that Semmelweis was an Austrian, but in Britain round about that time, the women who were served by midwives didn't get sepsis, and the women who were served by doctors did get sepsis. And one of the things the midwives used to do was they would come into the house, have a look at the woman and say, I'm going to light a fire for you. And they would light a fire. They would take the coals, they would clean out the hearth, and then they would light the fire. And in the process of lighting the fire, the hands would be seared with the flames. And in the process of searing with the flames, the midwife's hands became sterile. And that to me is just, you know, there's so much wisdom in culture that we don't know about, that we haven't put two and two together. And Ignaz Semmelweis put two and two together, and they wouldn't listen to him. So I guess the message is keep speaking, keep doing what we know is right for women. Freedom to move around, and the midwife needs to be observant but unobtrusive. With her midwife skills, she needs to not interfere. She needs to sit on her hands, and it's very, very hard to do because in a hospital environment, we've been taught to interfere. Warmth, semi-darkness, privacy stimulate melatonin and oxytocin, and they work together. So a woman, her labor works best when she's alone, when she's private, when she feels safe. She's got someone with her who she knows her stuff. She's not being observed. She's not being stared at. She's not being put on a time clock. And she's warm, and it's a little bit dark, and her melatonin can be secreted. Upright positions for birth, that relates to care of the perineum. Women should be giving birth with their legs closed. Babies don't come out from the pubic bone. They come out the back. And mostly I have women standing, kneeling, squatting, or sitting. So, and if they are on the bed, side lying is very good for keeping the perineum intact. So we have quite a high rate of intact perineums and a very low rate of tears, which we do stitch up if we have to. Holistic healthcare, you've talked about holistic healthcare. Who was it? Not Julie. What's your name? Julie's friend. Sorry, I forget your name. You spoke about holistic care, so homeopathy.
Irene.
Irene, hello, Irene. Thank you. Homeopathy, chiropractic treatment, dancing, yoga, herbs, and so on and so on. They all play a role, as well as the diet. We have postnatal follow-up, and then early parenting and infant maternal attachment. So we include all of these things in the way that we care for women at the Childbirth Centre. And I think I'm just going to end here because I've talked enough. And the question I'm going to ask is, what have I learned? And what came to me was, I've learned that I don't have to work so hard because mothers give birth. Thank you very much for listening and for inviting me. I really, really appreciate the audience, and I appreciate the opportunity to raise my voice and be a part of the International Day of the Midwives with the Lillie Centre. Thank you so much, Leila.
It's so great to hear your voice, Marianne. You've got so many important messages to share. I wonder maybe in the chat it would be useful if everyone popped in what they've learned, because I think it would be really helpful to reflect on what we've been hearing and how important these messages are. So we're so...
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It was so inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Lillie, maybe we should